Welcome to Ask Rabbit Malicious Compliance, where a jerk yells at a waitress and demands beer and ends up with a massive bill. I have some awesome stories for you today, so let's jump into it. This first post is titled, "Shame Me with Lunch Detention? Joke's on you, I'll sit here forever." I had forgotten about this story until the other day when I was chatting with a friend I went to high school with. It's silly, but I think it fits. It was the late 90s, I was still wearing too much flannel and continuing my historical trend of keeping books from the library much too long. I had a paper due for my sophomore global studies class, so I naturally took out more books than I could read, wrote the essay, and completely forgot about the books piled in the corner of my bedroom. After a series of overdue slips sent to my homeroom, I eventually did return the 4 or 5 books one sunny afternoon in the anonymous book drop-off during a study period. Promptly moved on to bigger and better things. About 2 weeks later, I was called down to the assistant principal's office in that space of time before classes officially started that was reserved for one thing and one thing only. The reprobates and the delinquents were in trouble. I walked the halls thinking that surely this was just a timing mishap and I was being summoned to receive congratulations for some kind of award I didn't know I had entered into the competition for. Yep, he just wants to prepare me for the surprise ticker tape parade. I was wholly unprepared to hear that I was receiving lunch detention to start immediately because I had not returned a single book that I still remember was slim and had a white and red cover from my global studies paper research. I tried to argue that there was a mistake since I was sure, like I am sure that I have fingertips, that I had returned it. But he could not be moved and I was sentenced to indefinite lunch detention until I either returned the book or paid the $16 to replace it. I left the office late for first period, defeated, but kept my head held high at lunch later that day as I walked past the entirety of the cafeteria, which held a couple hundred of my peers. Plastic food tray in hand, I went down the hall to the old shop classroom that had since been moved in the awaiting detention. I checked in with Mrs. Brown at her desk in front and took an inconspicuous seat in the back. Staring down at my canned peach slices, I braced for the worst. A murderous ruckus was going to break out any minute, I could tell. But once my ears stopped ringing, I discovered that it was a really calm escape from the crowded and rowdy lunchroom. I ate slowly that day, enjoyed my young thoughts in blissful quiet, and wondered what kind of heaven was this. To be fair, I did search far and wide for that book that first day. Attempts to find it in my locker, bedroom, and backpack were fruitless, and the general consensus in my home was that the school was being ridiculous. I certainly wasn't going to pay for something I didn't lose. So the next day, considering my brief brush with the law and the invisible stain already attached to my reputation, I went armed with a book and my lunch past the maddening crowds to the detention room. I sat there, day after day, for nearly 2 months of lunches. In retrospect, to this day, those remain some of the most relaxing lunch breaks of my life. I had around 40 solid minutes to recharge in mostly complete silence with my reasonably priced lunch and whatever book I was currently reading. I had to recount my origin story a few times since no one could figure out how the quiet bookworm of a girl who had never been in trouble before had landed in the wilds of detention. But I was mostly left to my own devices in this newly found peaceful retreat. I was friendly with Mrs. Brown, who had worked for the district of my small town since I was in elementary school, and even hooked her up with the Sweet Horse Whisper poster that she loved from my family's mom and pop video store. She must have felt bad for me because somewhere around the 1-month mark, she started up a collection to cover the cost of the book. She added the initial donation, but teachers who would stop by to chit-chat would add loose change to it, and the race to buy my freedom was on. After a few weeks, she handed me just under $7. My love of solitude was no match for the guilt of carrying around that money, or my mom who had just started a new job in the school district, so with a heavy heart, I paid in full for the missing book and went back to my old lunch table in the thick of the action. Months later, during the last week of school, I was called down to the library at my convenience and with sweaty palms forced myself to face the music over what was inevitably going to be yet another overdue book at the end of the day. Well, lo and behold, the end of the year inventory check had located the book as waylaid in the wrong section of the library. I received a few sheepish looks from the librarians as they refunded the money and apologized in a backward way that still made me the bad guy, as overdue books are the real blemish in one's character. So how were they to assume that I didn't lose the book? Remember my mom's new job at the school? Well, she just happened to be walking by the library just as I was finishing up, and to say that she laid into them is far too extreme sounding. But she did scold some stern-faced librarians into giving me a proper apology. She also demanded that they look into reforming their system, and my favorite part, take the proper measures to expunge my record. She was very concerned about me carrying around the albatross of false accusation, apparently. And just like that, my life of crime was over. Alright, this next post is titled, New hire misses most of the first 3 weeks of work, then uses me as a reference. Let's call her Karen, just because it fits. She came in and applied for a job, and when I looked at her resume and application, I realized she knew some of my old neighborhood friends and schoolmates. She interviewed well, so I gave her the job. Told her to be in Monday at 9 a.m. Monday morning, she's not in. She no calls, no shows. Tuesday, no call, no show. I had now written her off. Wednesday, she shows up about noon. Claims she was in her basement Sunday night and her brother was working out and he accidentally knocked her out during his intense workout. She claimed her doctor had told her she had a concussion and she should stay home for a couple days. She had no doctor's note, no marks on her head, but thinking her story was so off the wall it could almost be true, I let her come into work the next day. She worked Thursday and Friday. We paid at the end of every week and I gave her a check Friday. I also did not deduct the day she missed. She came to me and asked about the full paycheck. I told her we were a family business and realized people had lives outside of work. We tried to make sure people knew they were appreciated and tried to take care of our people. She teared up and thanked me and said we could count on her. She worked the full next week, did okay. She seemed to fit in. Seemed. The third week she shows up Monday, but Tuesday was another no show, no call. We did not hear from her for over 2 weeks. When she finally showed up, her story was the stuff of legends. She claimed her husband had forged divorce papers a couple years previous. Thinking she was divorced, she moved back into her parents' house. She claimed that her ex-husband was at her parents' house when she got home the last night she worked. He told her he made up the divorce and the paperwork was phony, so they were still married and he wanted to get back together. She claimed she refused and he kidnapped her. She said it took her until a couple days ago to get away from him. She wanted to come into work the next day. She did not call the police and he wasn't arrested. There was nothing in the papers or on the news about any of this. She was not hurt, thank God, and she asked if I believed her. I did not, but told her that I really needed someone I could count on coming in reliably every day. I gave her a paycheck for 1 week. She had worked 1 day and told her I wished her good luck. I had already replaced her and her replacement was one of the best employees we've ever had. Here's the malicious compliance. The next month, I come into a phone message that someone from so-and-so company called for a reference for Karen. As my secretary is handing me the message, she's laughing at the look on my face. I asked if she was kidding. She said she was not. She said she got a call from the man saying he was the owner of a company in the area and he asked about Karen. Then my secretary asked if she could listen in on the call. She was a pistol. She then goes and gets my partner and tells him I'm going to call and give Karen a reference. Now he's in my office laughing too. I call the guy and we make some small talk. I tell him what we do and he tells me what he wants Karen to do for him. I tactfully avoided answering any of his questions about Karen directly. I think he was beginning to suspect something. Remember folks, employers can get in a ton of trouble for bad references. He finally asked my opinion of Karen, and what I said was, if you can get Karen to work for you, you will be very lucky. He heard what I said and how I said it. He repeated that back to me exactly as I said it. All my words were the right ones, and it was my tone and intonation that got my point across. He thanked me and hung up. Karen comes into the office a couple days later. She looks mad but is trying to be pleasant. She told me she was having trouble finding a job and mentioned she had used me as a reference. She wanted to know if anyone from so-and-so company has called me. She knew they did. She told me that she really wanted the job at so-and-so company. I told her I'd been called and that I told the guy he'd be lucky to get her to work for him. My secretary confirmed that's what I told him. She told her that she was right next to me during the whole conversation. Karen smiled and thanked me and headed to the door. She said she wondered why she was having so much trouble getting a job. She asked if she could continue using me as a reference, and I told her absolutely. I also told her I'd tell everyone the same thing, that any employer would be lucky if they can get you to work for them. She walked away smiling, happy and clueless. All right, I hope you guys are enjoying these stories so far. Before we get into the next one, if you guys could please do me a huge favor and smash that like button down below and make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any future content. All right, this next post is titled, Jerk Gets Exactly What He Asked For, and this was originally posted to Tales from Your Server, so let's get into it. Last night, I worked a 14 top. They were all terrible people. Douchiest people I have ever come into contact with. The royal family of Doucheland. One guy sits down and orders a beer. He says, "Every time you come to the table, I want you to have a beer for me." I thought he was probably just joking, so I leave and come back, and he says, "Where's my beer? Did you really just forget what I told you like 2 minutes ago? Wow." So I said, "Oh, I am so sorry, it won't happen again." So for the next 2 hours, no matter what, every single time I approached the table, I left a beer. After about 45 minutes, the beer began to pile up. A friend of King Doucherbottom tried to take one that I put down, but I grabbed it and said, "Sorry, sir, this is your friend's beer. I would be happy to get one for you if you like." Long story short, he ended up buying 25 beers at $8 a pop with 20% mandatory auto gratuity on the table. He maybe drank 4. I have never felt so good in my life. It doesn't pay to be an arrogant butthole, folks. All right, that's going to wrap up today's malicious compliance stories. I hope you guys enjoyed those stories today. If you did, please go ahead and smash that like button. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any future content. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day.